Hello everyone, it's Old Guardian here. Onyxia's Lair miniset has now been around for long enough for the meta to stabilize a little bit, and yeah, this is a very polarized meta. It's very rock, paper, scissors meta, with control beating aggro, aggro beating Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan beating control. The most polarized meta probably that we have ever had in the history of Hearthstone. So there's a bunch of decks that you can succeed with, but what you're going to queue into has a huge effect on how your performance is going to be. So even giving deck advice in this environment, this feels a little different than ever before. But that said, let's take a look at what are the best decks in the game at the moment, and what you have the best chance to climb with. And coming in at number 13, we have Control Warrior. Yeah, Control Warrior is around using Kazakhstan, and as the list has been refined, Mutants has been dropped, Lord Barrow has been dropped. It's now purely a Dragon Kazakhstan deck. It's still a slow deck. You're controlling the game, you're removing the opponent's threats, but whenever you have Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan is immediately available. And there's a bunch of other minions, there's a bunch of dragons in the deck, because there's a couple of Onyxian Drakes, there's a couple of Onyxian Warders, and this raid was Onyxia. And Onyxian Warders in particular have impressed me. They're going better than I expected them to, even with such a low dragon count. But yeah, Control Warrior is still around. It's here beating all the decks that are trying to keep Kazakhstan out of the meta, ironically, whereas it loses to other Kazakhstan decks itself. So in a way, all Control Warrior players have to ask themselves, are we the baddies? Yikes. Be that as it may, at number 12 we have Libram Paladin. Libram Paladin is actually now the weaker of the two viable Paladin decks. Buff Paladin is stronger than Libram Paladin, and Libram Paladin looks like it's slowly, maybe even going out of the meta, but it does have some good matchups, because it's good against Control Warrior, for example, and it's good against Burn Shaman, and Burn Shaman is a really strong deck. But one thing that the miniset has done is that some of these old favorites, Quest Hand Warlock, Libram Paladin, they have finally become weaker. Quest Hand Warlock is actually in such a difficult position against Kazakhstan that it's dropped out of this list entirely, and Libram Paladin near the bottom. And these are two mainstay decks that were really expected to keep rolling on until the rotation, but yeah, I mean, both are still playable. Even Quest Hand Warlock is kind of playable, it's hovering at around 50% right now, and Libram Paladin can still climb, but power creep is real. At number 11 we have Quest Rogue, and Quest Rogue is one of my favorite decks right now to play, because Quest Rogue's matchup spread, there's a lot of 55-45s when it comes to Quest Rogue. Quest Rogue is not very polarized, one of the least polarized decks in the game, but that doesn't translate into superior success. It's a perfectly climbable deck, fun deck to play, the only real tempo deck in the meta at the moment, developing your own threats while denying threats from your opponent. And that's enough for place number 11. And at number 10 we have another long-time favorite in slight decline, and that is Face Hunter. Face Hunter was much stronger very early in Onyxia's Lair. Other decks were unrefined. Face Hunter always lost when decks are unrefined, it just punishes them so hard. But now that the meta decks are getting more refined, Face Hunter is finding those matchups a little bit more difficult, everything's just a little bit harder. Face Hunter can still run away with games. You still get your Trogon 1, you still buff it up, you hit face, you use your hero power, you have some spells. You still have the goodies there. But as opponents are getting tougher, Face Hunter is finding it harder to keep up. At number 9 we have the new best Paladin deck in the game, and that is Buff Paladin. And well, how did Buff Paladin overtake Libram Paladin? Libram Paladin is this jack of all trades, master of none, and Buff Paladin, it's a little bit more straightforward, and it also puts a little bit bigger threats a little bit faster onto the board. And that means that all these Kazakhstan decks are trying to get the Kazakhstan out, and then boom boom, treasures happen, and panic and destruction and terrible things. And Buff Paladin just is like, hey, I smack you in the face with my 12-12 or something, and boom boom, and no time for your Kazakhstan trickstery. So if you want to play Paladin right now, Buff Paladin is the way to go. And if you want to play Warlock, then at number 8 we have OwlTK Warlock. Yeah, OwlTK Warlock is now the best Warlock deck. It's stronger than Quest Hand Warlock at the moment. This is pretty good at defending against all sorts of these aggressive decks, Beast Druid, Aggro Shadow Priest, Burn Shamans. It has a nice defensive package, and then the combo comes in and boom, everyone dies. But it is weak against Kazakhstan. Now that Quest Hand Warlock is also weak to Kazakhstan, then it doesn't really matter that it has the difficulty. And OwlTK Warlock, yeah, hope that you don't meet Kazakhstan, hope that you do meet aggro decks, and yeah, it might work alright. And one of the many druid decks in the meta, at number 7, Aggro Druid. The most straightforward, most one-dimensional druid deck perhaps. It's just aggro. You just get in there, kill people, next game. Rectars. Sometimes you can do some trickstery with like Oracles of Elune and raise them in battle cards and stuff, but it's a fairly straightforward, very aggressive deck. It does one thing, it does that thing pretty well, and that's enough for place number 7. But the one thing that Aggro Druid does can be stopped, and it can be stopped for example by OwlTK Shaman. OwlTK Shaman is a pretty sweet defensive deck. It punishes slow decks because it has an OTK win condition. It can defend against aggro decks, that's pretty sweet, but then there's stuff like Burn Shaman that's just pew 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 and you die. And these quest decks with so many threats, so much pressure, infinite pressure, and OwlTK Shaman is just not very good at handling all of that. Still a fine option for a Shaman deck, not as good as Burn Shaman, but a fine option if you like this slower, this control combo style of play, then OwlTK Shaman is your deck of choice for ladder right now. And at number 5, also one of my favorite decks at the moment, it's Quest Hunter. Quest Hunter is back in the meta. Quest Hunter is doing better than Face Hunter at the moment. Quest Hunter is stronger than Face Hunter in many of the aggro mirrors, so there's other aggressive decks and you're just pew-pewing them pretty well. Quest Hunter also has the advantage that it's good against Burn Shaman. Not a lot of decks can say that, but Quest Hunter can. But then again, Quest Hunter also has weaknesses, these sorts of mid-range decks that it just cannot pressure fast enough and they just put so many big threats you can't handle it. And Kazakusan, the evil Kazakusan, is also a dreadful opponent for Quest Hunter. Right now it looks like Dragonbane Shot is great in Quest Hunter, the other new card Furious Howl a little bit less so. It's still a little bit undecided whether you run Furious Howl and Multicaster in Quest Hunter or not, but I would slightly prefer to run just Multicaster at the moment. And at number 4, the stronger of the ramping druid decks, which is Spell Druid. There are 2 ramping druid archetypes on the ladder, Spell Druid, and Ramp Druid is even more popular one of the 2. But looking at statistics, it looks like Ramp Druid is just completely obsolete. Spell Druid has all the good matchups Ramp Druid has, Spell Druid is very good against Ramp Druid, and Ramp Druid just doesn't have as many ways to defend itself against aggression as Spell Druid has, because Spell Druid, you can still sometimes get stuff like Low-Fly Swarm going on, then you can get Arbor up, you can even beat aggro decks. Whereas Ramp Druid, it's all about that Kazakusan and it just seems a little bit too weak. Aggro is a little too fast for that. So I actually wouldn't recommend playing the pure Ramp Druid variant on the ladder at all at the moment, but I could recommend playing the Spell Druid variant. Then we reach the top 3 best decks in the game at the moment, and as number 3 we have Aggro Shadow Priest. Yeah, Priest as one of the 3 best decks in the game, and this is not just a weak one thing, we are already deeper into Onyxia Lair. Aggro Shadow Priest still very strong. Just a very good deck. It is strong in a number of aggro mirrors, it is strong against Kazakusan decks, it mostly loses to these a little bit more mid-range decks, stuff like Beast Druid, that can just swing the game and have such a board that you can't answer it with Aggro Shadow Priest, or stuff like Burn Shaman, that's able to defend just long enough and then blow you up. Aggro Shadow Priest is also a rare deck that didn't see any development with Onyxia Lair. It's the exact same as it was before Onyxia Lair, the meta just got more favorable for it. And it still hasn't seen any meaningful development. A couple of weeks into Onyxia Lair, it's still the same list, but it's just good right now. And as number 2 we have the strongest druid deck in the game at the moment, it is Beast Druid. Beast Druid has finally shed the shade of Goth, the shade of Ivus from it. It's actually a deck that doesn't require a single legendary card. All the key cards, they're epics. It's just rares, commons and epics, and it's really great. Flexible, it can be very aggressive, it can be very mid-range, it can play a control role, it can put up threats out of nowhere, have big swing turns. Just a lot of play that you can make with Beast Druid, and one of the strongest decks in the game at the moment. But the very best deck in the game at the moment is still the same as it was right at the start of Onyxia Lair. It is Burn Shaman. Burn Shaman is a phenomenal deck, good at defending, has that OTK potential, has the potential to deal some chip damage in first and then finish off with spells. Very flexible, can freeze boards. There's so many things that you can do with Burn Shaman. But this is a rock, paper, scissors meta after all, and Burn Shaman does have a number of weaknesses. There are no decks that have like just a great matchup spread overall, just because of how polarized the meta is. So while Burn Shaman is the strongest option, it has the greatest probability to find good matchups, it can also just run into miserable matchups and just lose outright. So no decks are as dominant as we have seen in many of the previous metas, But that's not because all the decks would be like on an even footing, it's because decks just outright win some decks and lose to other decks, which kind of doesn't promote decision making and stuff. But anyway, Burn Shaman, #1 deck on the ladder right now. All of the decks in this video perfectly viable for climbing, all the way to Legend, doing really well, and just pick the style you like and go for it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please click the like button, subscribe to my channel, and check out my Twitch channel.